Hey, David, thanks for joining me today on DBL's channel. We're going to talk about injunctions today. People ask me, what is an injunction? And it's not as easy as it's stop doing something. It's more than that. And there are a lot of things about injunctions that you need to know. And so we're going to do it here in five fast facts. David, what is an injunction? That's fact number one.
Yeah, so an injunction is a court order that forces somebody to either do something or to stop doing something. And there's also injunctions that are intended to preserve the status quo, we call it, which is prevent something from changing during the course of a case. But it's basically a court order directed at behavior as opposed to money, which is usually what civil cases are about.
Okay. Well, and I think there are two kinds of injunctions, and it's important to know that as well. There are preliminary injunctions, which are injunctions that take place at the beginning of a court case and are preserving the status quo throughout the court case. And then there are final injunctions, permanent injunctions that are entered at the end of the case, which basically means you've won your case and the do or not do thing happens permanently. So what's an example of an injunction, David, just so that we can get an idea of what we're talking about here?
Oh, I mean, in the intellectual property context, for example, in a trademark case, an injunction might order the infringer to stop using the infringing trademark, or similar with patents, that stop making the
Selling
patent.
the product.
Exactly. Just
Yep.
take it off, do it, whatever it is.
We've had cases where retailers have had to pull hundreds of thousands of products off the shelf due to an injunction, or they had to stop shipping products due to an injunction, whatever it was. We've had that happen multiple times. We've won a preliminary injunction, and I'll tell you what, they're powerful. That's such an expensive thing. You can win your case by winning the preliminary injunction. It's a practical matter. You don't technically win your case, but you prove so much ahead of time that it can be very off-putting to the defendant when you get an injunction in your favor. So, David, speaking of which, how hard is it to prove an injunction? What is the standard for that? How does that work?
It can be challenging. So the biggest thing that courts look at in terms of injunctions is the injury irreparable? Or another way of looking at that is, could money compensate you for this injury, or is it beyond the scope of what money could compensate you for? Because courts generally are a little bit loath to tell people what to do and issue those types of injunctions unless you can really establish that money's not good enough here, that because of the infringement, you're going to lose customers that will never come back.
Reputational harm is a big one. I mean, and that's crazy because a lot of people don't understand that. They think, hey, the injunction is there because this is all about money. But if you can be compensated in dollars and cents very easily, you're not going to get a preliminary injunction. You might get a permanent injunction, but a preliminary injunction requires that you have a showing that money's not enough, right? So that's important to understand. They also balance the equities. That's a part of the injunctive relief process. Who's going to be harmed more, the person asking for the injunction or the other party? And David, tell me a little bit about an injunction bond or forthcoming bond. I think that's something else a lot of people don't know about. And you win your injunction and they're surprised. They're like, wait, what? I've got to pay money because I've won? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So what
Yeah.
is that?
Yeah. A lot of times the party that wins the injunction has to post a bond with the court, basically to cover losses if the court's wrong on the injunction. If it turns out that a court enters a preliminary injunction and at the end of the day at the trial, they lose their case, then that they're harmed by having been enjoined, by being prevented from doing that. So we post a bond to cover those losses. So
Now,
sometimes,
there's an argument over that. I mean, you will get to argue the value of the bond and say it's not worth as much as the other side is saying it's worth. So you do argue the value of that injunction bond, and that's for preliminary injunctions. Permanent injunctions, obviously, you've won your case, you don't have to post a bond. But a lot of injunction work is in the preliminary injunction space. So anything else we need to consider when we're talking about injunctions?
well, there's always the enforcement side, of course. Like once the injunction issues, hopefully they'll just respect the injunction and do what they're supposed to do. But sometimes people don't, or sometimes parties will be acting in concert with other parties. And so maybe the defendant stops selling the infringing product, but what if it's still on the store at a retail location? How do you enforce against those individuals?
So like a product manufacturer may stop shipping, but the retailers are still selling.
Right.
So that has to be enforced against the retailers too that aren't a party to the case. Crazy. So I think this brings us to another point. Injunctions are complicated. And if you're working with an attorney that hasn't litigated a lot of injunctions, it's important that you find another attorney. I know that sounds harsh, but I've been in preliminary injunction cases that turned into 3-day mini trials at the beginning of a case where we put on witnesses, we did depositions ahead of the injunction. This is the very beginning of a case. It's sort of unusual. And if you haven't done a lot of injunction practice, it's a challenging thing to do. So I think legal counsel is important.
Absolutely. And that's somebody that's been through that process because it is a very unique process in the litigations process.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me, David. I think we've killed this injunction thing. Thank you all for listening.